Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and wherever you are in the world, Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 102. And, somewhat removed from the post-election craziness here in the US, where it was, in boxing they call it split decisions. We're still waiting for results and other things. There's a lot of split stuff. It always has been, always will be. And we're going to talk about some of those today. Stick around. We're kind of split screen, aren't we? And we can
and I got
go
ends. My daughter's telling me, who knows? There you go.
Is that right? I don't have to worry about that. I just do my tips.
You have a split part, I guess.
Absolutely. How are you, sir? Welcome, everybody. Another episode, another day, another dollar in the world of Two Chaps and at Two Chaps Towers, as we call them. And yes, so we are talking about, we're not going to really talk about elections and stuff like that. People have had enough of that, but we're really just talking about the divide, which and divisions exist pretty much everywhere in the world, internally in countries. But the US is one of those countries where you really have to know where you're going and who you're dealing with when it comes to the regions involved. Correct? Am I correct? I don't know.
Well, I suspect you are, because you're much wiser than I am. So I would argue you are correct. I think smart people have long discovered that there are often more differences, behavioral differences within countries than there are between countries. Some might argue. So the divides, even though we may not always be comfortable addressing them, and it may not always be taught that way in our field, I think it is more than time that we shed some light on that. I'm not saying that our entire field is ignorant to this. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the way the intercultural world started out, the cross-cultural training and coaching world started out, was with a focus on nation cultures. And while that is helpful to a certain degree, it is also misleading if we rely only on a country by country comparison, because we're neglecting and ignoring that exist within, the nuances within. And this year, for two people like Brett and myself who live in the United States and who were not born in this country, the differences within the United States became, I think, more apparent than ever. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, absolutely. It even got down to, city, urban areas and country areas and things like this. And it may be it's related, but follow me here. I was impacted the other day by a journalist saying they interviewed somebody who was from the more remote areas of this country, and they didn't want to be interviewed on by audio or camera because they were self-conscious about their accent, and it really kind of brought home to me. We talk a lot about trying to teach people internally in this country about taking their biases away and how much biases come into accents from foreign accents. I've got a foreign accent, but other people have different accents that people apply biases to. But we do that internally here in this country too, right? And I'm guilty of it as anybody. And yet, some of the smartest people in the world come from those areas and have those accents too. But so yeah, I mean, that really kind of shows you that even very locally, and if we're talking elections, we're talking politics, and they say politics is local, and it is in no place better demonstrated than that than in the US.
Yeah.
So I think it's very, very important, and we need tools to understand those and dig into some of those regionalities.
Yeah, and when people from outside the US are dealing with the United States, whether they come here to do business or whether they're doing business with the United States remotely, there's often a perception of the US being a certain way. There are certain common denominators when we look at US culture, and there's no denying that there are common ideals or common values that a vast majority of people in the United States would agree on and adhere to. However, there's also a nuance that is not always visible from the outside. This year has brought it to light. I would say that the past 5 to 10 years in the United States have gradually shown to the world that there are noticeable nuances that we need to take into account, right? So one value that I see true throughout the country, and I'm curious to hear your opinion on this, Brett, or anyone who's watching this, comment on this. Which values do you think are true for the United States across the country and across whatever divides you notice? I think the exceptionalism, the individualism is one of those strains that goes across all subcultures in the United States. This belief in the power or the right or the right to the pursuit of happiness, as it is said in the Constitution, this ability to follow your dream without being stopped by the surroundings. That is something that I think goes across all subcultures in the United States. However, how it is lived is different, right? So I've dealt with a lot of more collectivist or group orientated subcultures in the United States, where this almost, I'm putting it in air quotes, almost egotistic individualism would be frowned upon, and yet there's this belief in I can do it if I give it my all, whereas I would not be able to do that in many other parts of the world. So that is something that I see as a commonality. But what do you see as a commonality, Brett?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the individuality, and sometimes it can be misjudged as selfishness, and it's and in general, there are selfish people in all cultures. I bristle at that because I don't see it as selfishness. I see it as a celebration and obviously taking advantage of the system that was built to promote that. That is the way that this country was built. But you're really right. It does manifest itself in different ways in this country, and that nuance when it comes to doing business. When it comes to interacting with clients and customers and colleagues and things like that, to ignore them would be at your peril. Yeah.
And you mentioned something, or you brought something up that I think is often overlooked, the way this country was designed. And this is a country largely by design. It is not a country that evolved over centuries in a certain way. This country, the United States, is one of the few countries around the world that can really be classified as a nation by design and by intent. And there were some would say flaws, some would say perfect settings in doing so, and it was designed to divide between those who succeed and those who don't. And those who succeed to be first, those who succeed to win, those who succeed to prevail, or maybe even to survive, right? This was from the very get-go a country that was largely built on a digital experience, 1 or 0. Do we win or do we lose? There is rarely in the U.S. culture do you find a willingness to split the difference. It is either I take it or you take it, and it's a winners or losers proposition. And it's even reflected in the popular culture that comes from the United States. You go back to the early days of Hollywood, with the crime movies or crime TV shows or Western movies, it's always the good versus the bad. It's always black versus white, or black magic versus white magic. Disney movies, the good force against the bad force, right? Star Wars, the good people, the bad people, the empire and the revolution, right? It is always a bipolar experience. And that is something that I notice is very typical for the US, which may be a common thread in US culture. However, it also sets by design a default line, or a fault line between those who have and those who don't have, or those who win and those who lose. It's Republicans versus Democrats. It's white versus black. It's rich versus poor. It's country versus rural. It's educated versus uneducated. There is a lot of these dualisms, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining, Alvaro. Hello.
Hey, Alvaro, thank you. Thanks for watching. Tell us where you're dialing in from, whoever's watching. Let us know which part of the world you're joining us from. Always want to know your experience. And if you have something to add to the topic of the divide, we called it a little bit, we pointed it a little bit, the divided states of America.
Yeah.
Because obviously they're not divided at this point in history. However, look back 160 years, there was a strong desire to divide the country, right? So the division has been there for a long, long time, right? And has it been overcome in certain areas? Maybe. Are other divisions still lingering? I would argue they do. What are some of the divisions you experience in your day-to-day, Brett?
Well, I'm cognizant, as somebody who kind of is, it's a personal choice, but I'm always cognizant of this, what I think is a negative division between rich and poor, and the assumption that if you've got something, you've worked hard for it and you deserve it. Therefore, but there are people that work harder than me in this world and have got far less, and it's just circumstances. So when it comes to things like healthcare, and I have discussions about healthcare in this country with people, because I come from a country where healthcare is free at its point of engagement, and when you say free, people think, oh, well, you want everything for free. Well, no, of course it's not free. It gets paid for. It gets supplied by the community and the society and the structure that is put in place to provide it. But it takes away that type of separation. That it is one thing, and again, this is personal. I'm not going to blanket this, but it is a personal bristle of mine when people say, well, if you don't have healthcare, it's your fault because you haven't worked hard enough. And because, and that is a dangerous premise. That's kind of really the what I say, the negative of survival of the fittest. There are going to be people in this world, there are going to be people among us who, either don't have the sophistication or don't have the access to the resources to be able to take care of their basic needs and family. And I think it is on us to keep aware of that. But when we talk about division, and we talk about the divided states, sometimes that conversation gets lost. To me, that's a personal thing. So again, bringing it back to the business side of it, it does manifest itself in business. So you have to be cognizant of that if you're working with colleagues that come to this country, or even internally in this country. It's just something that's a personal thing of mine when I try and and obviously our clients have questions about this. They question this when they're coming here to the US. So tell me, how does this manifest itself?
Right.
What are these conversations I should expect to be having with my American colleagues through the lens of understanding that I don't even know which side of the fence they're on, and why should there be a fence anyway?
Or they don't even see the fences yet. They have this feeling that maybe they need to become aware of some divisions, and they want to know which dividing lines they need to be aware of as outsiders. And I think this would be a good start to look at things. This is how I approached it personally, to avoid picking sides, because that's easy as an outsider. It's easy to be to get under the wheels of that partisanship or that divide. So I've been my desire for the longest time has been to be Switzerland, quote unquote, to be neutral on some of those divides. However, wherever the subcultural trends affect me personally or my family, obviously that's where I do become partial, right? That's where I do take a stand. However, as an immigrant to this country and as a guest, so to say, I'm very careful to throw a stone or to cast judgment. I want to acknowledge where people are from here. Alvaro says he's from Lima in Peru. Buenos dias, Alvaro. A country that is also going through leadership changes right now, right? With an interim presidency that ended very quickly. I don't even know what the current status is. Patrick Emmanuel, I believe here from the United States, says the desire to divide has never gone away and is, I'm suspecting he meant to type now resurging. It is, yes. And Alvaro is asking, how do we see their culture? How do I see them as a German, and what can we learn from them? That's all right. That's a fair question. Thank you, Alvaro. As a German, I see some of these trends of strong individualism and can-do spirit as inspiration. That is one of the reasons why I choose to live in this country, because this idea of winning and the ability to win with very few obstacles put in my way by governmental restriction, that to me is a positive, right? So I keep taking advantage of that, because I look at my friends and family in the old country, what type of red tape and restrictions they sometimes have to deal with, that I don't bother about it. So for me, that is something that I enjoy, that I have the ability to apply myself and see much more immediate results than I would in the old country. On the other hand, I also see that this type of winner takes all, or this very competitive society is leaving people in the dust, or is not providing the same type of resource buffer system that I have gotten used to growing up. Most people in North America, especially in the US, would label, I would argue, mislabel many European societies as being socialist. I think you ain't seen socialism yet, so that's not what it is. So that we got to talk about the terminology, maybe a separate episode, maybe 5 episodes. But that is something that that I miss a little bit from the European setup. That is a very simple answer to a deep question, Alvaro, but thank you for that. How about you, Brett? What is it how do you see the US as an Australian, and what can Australians learn from the United States?
Well, before I answer that, I've got to call out the terminology of the old country. Can anybody else see Christian rocking back in his armchair with his pipe going, back in the old country? Back in the old country.
I don't have a pipe.
But I can just imagine how you don't have to light it. But no, I agree with you. It's yes, I do celebrate that. I tell people when they come here, this is what I love about this country. It's why it's been able to evolve and become a leader in this world in a very quick span of time, right? This really quick take action, high risk type of attitude that comes with the interactions that you experience here in the US. And I do celebrate them, But of course, there is that, we have to accept that part of that is a negative. There is a negative side of that, and that may get in the way of business in certain circumstances too. So I think it's a great point to consider. It's worth learning about. It's worth taking advantage of any resources you can to learn about these.
And I think it's important to recognize, as you're doing business with the United States, that you want to be cognizant of these subcultural trends. Yes, we won't argue that there's an overarching commonality across the country. However, some of the narratives that you may have been taught early on in your education, or that sometimes is still being perpetuated often inadvertently, the narrative of the United States being a melting pot where everyone, no matter where they came from or they're continuing to come from, will become one-way American somehow. That is not quite true. That may have been the truth in the past. I don't know. I'm not that old, and I'm not gray with a pipe in my rocking chair to know that. However, the experience of the United States that I have, both through personal experience and through the experience of people who are still alive and are much older and can tell me about how it was in the 60s, 50s, 40s, maybe, it is not a melting pot. A melting pot would imply that no matter who you are as an individual, whatever color, shape, or form you brought to U.S. society has been normalized to a common denominator, and everybody is the same. If you melt everything in a pot, you get probably a brownish, homogeneous mass with no individual distinction. And we just talked about the American exceptionalism and individualism. The individuals are quite visible in US culture. So it is not melted down to a nondescript neutral. It is very much accentuated in different shapes, form, color, sizes. Some people use the metaphor of a mosaic, others call it a soup bowl or a salad bowl, where you still see the distinctions of each individual piece and part of it. So as you're doing business with the United States, it would behoove you, it would be a smart thing to learn about these nuances, who you're dealing with. It would be smart to know, am I dealing with somebody of a certain immigrant background? Is this somebody who is white, Irish, Catholic from a certain part of the United States, or is this somebody who is of a Latinx background and fairly recently immigrated to the United States, maybe second generation, bilingual family, different socioeconomic and educational backgrounds? All of these things matter in daily interactions. These things may not be publicly talked about in a corporate context because corporate policy and governance has been practicing in the United States to I'm using a phrase that may not be perfectly accurate, to sweep it under the rug. It's not something we openly discuss. However, subconsciously, these factors still matter. They play a role in daily interactions. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Every day. They do for me every day. And I always say I'm lucky to live in a very diverse neighborhood here, where we've got people from Korea, people from Mexico, people from the Middle East, people African American, people from the Polish community here in Chicago, which is a large community, but in this, even locally here, it's embedded deeply. So there's Irish, obviously the Chicago Irish, so you very locally here. I don't have to step out of my South Asian too, of course, because of my love of cricket. I've got to have my South Asian neighbours. So it's great. I get to walk out the front door, I walk through the grocery stores and that kind of thing, and I see people from all kinds of walks of life, and I'm drawn to those people. I'm drawn to their stories. I'm drawn to their experiences because my experience is one. It's a silo amongst many, and so Christian's actually doing a couple of webinars coming up. When are they coming up? Tomorrow? Is it tomorrow?
Tomorrow, I'm actually doing 2 webinars. I'm doing one in German for a German-speaking audience. So it's called Endlich Verständlich USA. That rhymes. Endlich Verständlich, which basically means finally comprehensible. That is a loose translation. So if you follow this link, we'll post a clickable link in the comments too. And so you can register for this. This is tomorrow, which tomorrow is Wednesday, November 25th. So if you're watching the recording, just know I'm referring to a webinar that is happening on November 25th, and that the session in German will be at 9:30 a.m. Eastern US time, which is 15:30 or 3:30 p.m. in Central Europe. So for the Germans watching this, there's also an English language version of that same content, that same webinar, happening at 12 noon Eastern time in the US. or 1800 in Central Europe, depending on what you prefer. Would you like to listen to this face in German or in English? Some would argue English is more fun because I make more mistakes. But who knows? You'll find out. I'll post the link in the chat box. But I'm curious, Brett, because you mentioned that you live in a fairly diverse neighborhood, and you consciously engage with a, how do we say this, with a diverse environment.
Yeah.
Would you not agree that there is quite a few subcultural groups in this country who never engage with one another?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's. I would even say, even though I do say it's a very diverse neighborhood, the diversity does kind of stick to itself. You know, there is a drawing. Once new people come here, there is a, we have a Polish grocery store, right? So most of the people speak Polish in that store. It may as well be a store in any street in Krakow, But and there's Indian grocery stores, which I love to go to. By the way, it's great. I love to go there. But do people from other cultures necessarily engage in those areas? So individually, I think I'm trying to bring those together. I guess one place it happens is at the school, in the school, my daughter, where there are 30 different languages spoken as second languages.
Wow.
In a student body of only 500 kids. That's an indication of how many, they do this every year. They ask their parent body and they say, do you speak another language at home? And to identify 30 different languages amongst 500 kids, it's pretty intense, right?
That is intense, yes.
It is. It is, but it's great because it pretty much, speaking another language becomes kind of the norm, right? Our daughter speaks another both languages fluently, and she's kind of normal. She's not special anymore, whereas so I think that there is I just met a new neighbor that has moved in recent months, and they're from South Asia. They're Indian, and but it is they were asking me about this. So I was saying, who do you see, who goes where, what goes on in this community here, because they've just moved from the city to the suburbs for more room. But it basically, I was kind of, I will say this, I was not shocked, but probably disappointed that they said, well, we really get a feeling that this is a great neighborhood because of its diversity, from what we've seen, understanding that there are some places in Chicago where we probably wouldn't be as welcome as here. And that is, and I kind of think to myself, it's just, that still happens. It's freaking 2020, people,
Well, and this happened in maybe not in this extreme way as you're describing it, but that happened to me to my family when we moved to Atlanta, to this specific neighborhood in Atlanta, where there were people who cautioned us and said, "Are you sure you want to choose this neighborhood? Do you think you'll feel welcome there?" And I questioned these covert concerns because nobody was really speaking up about what they truly meant the challenge might potentially be. And it came down to ethnicity, right? So we moved, we're a white family, we're all white, and we moved to a predominantly African-American neighborhood. And the concern was, well, you may not like this, or they may not like you. And to me, as those who know me will not be surprised when I said that this even egged me on more. So I said, "Yep, now I truly want to move here." However, this not being able to step outside one's subcultural bubble or circles into others is also prevalent here. So our younger daughter went to the local middle school, which is like a 5-minute, maybe 10-minute walk from my house. We can walk or ride the bike to school, right? For 2 years, she was the only white student in the entire middle school. So there are other white neighbors. They did not send their kids to that school. And that that was interesting to me. It also was interesting that the black community, or the black students that my daughter was hanging out with, also, not all of them, but some of them, othered her. So she was obviously the subject of examination, close examination, and also different levels of judgment, because she was the only one that was different than the rest of the group. So either side, either ethnic side, had very little knowledge of each other, had not grown up with an interest in each other, which to me is still surprising.
Yeah.
And that is something that you need to keep in mind as you're doing business with the United States. You got to be cognizant of these things, because they can derail business conversations. They can derail how you market. They can totally catch you off guard. And these are often things that are not openly discussed, because they're pain points for a lot of people in U.S. society. They come attached with inherited guilt or unresolved issues, and covert finger pointing and blaming. And as an outsider looking into this with outsiders' lenses, you will almost certainly step in a trap. I did multiple times. I suspect it was no different for you, Brett.
I still step in traps.
Yeah.
Intentionally sometimes, if I can.
Yep.
But you know, Kelly McLeod Chingan, calls that sometimes the groan zone. People, it's uncomfortable. They go, "Oh, I have to talk about this. I don't want to." You got to do it here in this country. You got to learn about it. You got to do it, and that's why I don't mind stepping in traps. It is part of the deal. It's like playing golf, or in my case, it's comedy, but it's a sport, golf. And they put traps in and people, what happens in golf, people actually are known for being able to play very effectively out of traps, out of the sand bunkers. And they train this, they practice it. They sit in sand for hours and practice playing shots out of it. That's what you got to do. Same event. It's seen as a negative part of the golf course, and some people relish it. They go, "Great! If I'm in the sand, I'm not in the deep grass. At least I know what I'm dealing with in the sand, because I practice it so much." I think that's a pretty clever metaphor. I just came up with
I like it a lot. We should write that down and use it for training programs.
Absolutely.
This may not be a trap, but this just comes to mind, because it's also another pain point that this year has brought up, especially in the U.S., is death by law enforcement, which is something that, for some reason, statistically seems to befall people of color more than other ethnicities in this country. And I'm only halfway joking. I'm actually not joking at all. And this is a lot of stuff that we see on the news, on the media. And so it was for me until this week. And I was walking my dog, really, literally around the corner from my house, and my neighbor pulled up her car beside me and rolled down her window, and we started chatting and asked her how her day has been going. And she said, she just came back from a vigil. And I said, "Well, what was that about?" "Well, my cousin got shot by police." So when this hits you this close, this is not my family, but this is a neighbor I really like, and we've known each other since we moved here. This stuff is so insipid. This is present in this society. And as an outsider doing business here, you gotta learn about this. You gotta make yourself aware and cognizant of these things if you truly want to succeed here. Because you remember, it's a win or lose. So if you don't want to lose here, better smarten up around these things.
Absolutely.
So I would be delighted if you were able to join us tomorrow, either in the morning or at midday. Well, that is US Eastern time. If you're in Europe, 3:30 in the afternoon, perfect time to grab a coffee at your desk, at your home office desk, that is, and join me for 45 minutes. We'll talk about these things in German, right here.
I'm coming for the German.
Or the English one.
I just I like to hear people speak other languages, and I don't mind if I don't understand what they're talking about. I'll just but I've seen Christian do this before. I know what he's saying.
You just wait. There'll be new nuances that I haven't used before. Ooh, I'll catch you by surprise.
Probably calling me names and all that kind of stuff too, you know, just and I won't know. I'll sit there smiling and other people are going,
What we both, Brett and I, would really love for you to do is drop us a note, drop us a comment, like this stuff, give us your hearts, your thumbs up, your applause symbols, whatever it is on the social network that you're watching this. We're streaming this live on YouTube. We're streaming it live on LinkedIn and on Facebook. And that's about it, right? And that's good enough. I think that's good enough.
Subscribe to the YouTube channels.
Yes, would you please?
Yes, that'd be great.
And the more you engage with us, the more we know which topics resonate with you and what you might like to delve deeper into in follow-up episodes. We already hinted at, what was it the other day, music across culture. So that might be an ongoing loose series. And we will also have these ongoing country focus series. So we have Brazil, today was United States. I mean, if we run out of countries, we might eventually do Australia too, but hey, just stay put, right? So we'll go through some of them.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. Very much appreciate you being here, and we will be back tomorrow.
Bye.
Well, bye.